today's video we are going to compare pellet stoves to wood stoves, advantages and disadvantages of both. As you see here, I have a wood fireplace insert and I recently switched back to wood after 10 years with a pellet stove. What I liked about the pellet stove is I could fill it in the morning, it would run all day in a thermostat, and I wouldn't need to fill it again until I went to bed that night. And I would just repeat the process the next day and shut it down once a week to clean it, and then of course do a big annual cleaning. So it was a pretty trouble-free experience until the stove got some age and it started breaking down a lot. I was having a lot of mechanical issues. And the problem with that is when you have a mechanical failure with your stove, it's obviously down and it's not heating your home. You either have to get a tech in to service it and pay for that service and the associated parts, or decide to do it yourself. And even then, the parts, some of the parts on these pellet stoves are not cheap. As the stove got older, I was dealing with that more and more often, and it just became to the point where the cost of ownership on that stove, I couldn't justify keeping it, and I really didn't want to go down that road again and buy another one and just keep repeating that cycle. So I decided to switch to wood. The other thing I didn't like about pellet stoves, we lose power somewhat often here in the winter months, and when we lose power, I either have to connect that pellet stove to a backup power supply or a generator to keep that thing running and heating my home. Really didn't want to deal with that because we have a lot of hour to 3 hour duration power outages, and it's just a hassle to go through that. Not to mention, if you have a really long duration power outage, I didn't want to have to worry about running out of fuel for the generator, possibly not being able to heat my home. So I just wanted a wood stove that I could fill up and it would do its job whether it had power or not. Now this stove here does have a blower on it, which I'll turn on for you. So that's pushing heat out into the room, but when the power goes out, the stove continues to heat. I'm getting a lot of heat out of the vents even without that blower running. The other thing I didn't like about the pellet stove, you're at the mercy of the pellet dealers and what they want to charge for pellets. Not only that, if you have a really, harsh cold snap, you can have pellet shortages where you might not be able to buy them at all, or I've had dealers ration them where you can only buy a half ton at a time or something like that. Now wood stoves, what I like about the wood stove is if I source my own firewood on my property, or I get it on Facebook Marketplace, or I work with a tree service, I can source firewood for free. Problem is, there's a ton of work associated with doing that. You obviously need to harvest the wood, cut the wood, split the wood, stack it, season it, and then bring it into your home. It's also a dirty fuel. When you're bringing in firewood, you're dropping pieces of bark, pieces of wood chips, dirt on the floor. You're constantly having to sweep up after yourself. In my opinion, they're a lot dirtier than a pellet stove. Now, you do get some dust from the pellet stoves when you're pouring pellets into the stove, but the dirt and the dust from the pellet stove pales in comparison to the wood, in my opinion. But if you keep up after it, it's not too big of a problem. The other thing with a wood stove, you need to tend to it a lot more often. I mentioned a minute ago that I could fill the pellet stove in the morning and it would run all day. With a wood stove, depending on the stove you have, you might be filling this thing maybe 4 to 6 times per day in a 24-hour period. So it requires a lot more care. When you fill the stove, you've got to adjust the air controls until the fire gets going, and then you dial them back for that long duration burn. But you're having to tend to it a lot more than you would a pellet stove. Now, I talked about the points of failure with a pellet stove and the mechanical parts, and this does have a blower in it. But like I said, even when that blower fails, the stove continues to run. And that's only one part. It doesn't have the complexity of a pellet stove and the issues associated with that. Now, if you have a freestanding stove and you don't have a blower like that, it's a non-issue. You have a radiant heat appliance. This is a radiant heat appliance too, but it's obviously has less surface area than a freestanding stove to do that. Now, I think burning wood's kind of a lifestyle choice. The people I've talked to, they either love burning wood or they absolutely hate it. I don't see too many people that are in the middle on that. So it's a pretty big undertaking if you decide to burn wood to heat your home. Now, in our home, our primary source of heat is an oil-fired furnace, and this is a supplemental heat source. Now, with that said, with this running 24 hours a day, there are days on end where that furnace might not run. But if the temperature dips and it gets cold and the wood stove can't satisfy our temperature upstairs, that furnace kicks on. The modern EPA stoves like this one here, I can fill this thing before I go to bed at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I won't have to touch it again until the next morning. And I just rake around the coals, take a little bit of ash out of the stove, and fire it up for the day. So thanks for watching. I hope this helped you out if you're in the market for one or the other. Or maybe I steered you clear of both of them. Who knows? We'll see you guys in the next video.